Welcome to Macon Memories. I'm Lynda Wright at Randolph-Macon College. Today is October 14th, 2016, and today I'm interviewing Professor Kelly Lambert, the Joan and Macon Brock Professor of Psychology at Randolph-Macon. Welcome, Kelly.
Hi, nice to be here.
Okay, Kelly, to get started, can you tell us a bit about your background and how you became interested in psychology and neuroscience?
Sure. I grew up in Alabama, first generation college student, so going to college was kind of a foreign thing in my family. And I ended up, I loved anything related to biology when I was in high school, kind of a science geeky kid, loved spending time in the woods and catching animals and such. And I thought that I may be interested in pre-med when I went to college. My undergraduate, where I went for undergraduate was Samford University. Some people hear Stanford, and sometimes I don't correct them. But Samford University is a lovely undergraduate institution, liberal arts, in Birmingham, Alabama, so it wasn't too far. And I was a double biology and psychology major. So even though I started off thinking I was interested in pre-med, because I really didn't know any other sciencey kinds of things, I got interested in psychology as well. I remember taking one of these career inventory assessment tests when I was in high school, and I did all my interests, and it came up psychiatrist. So that's something about the brain and the mind and the way that works, I think, was always part of my interest. So I took psychology as well and was very interested and decided to double major in biology and psychology. I had to commute. We really couldn't afford for me to live on campus. So I still feel like I didn't have that full college experience. So I want to make sure all the students appreciate being able to immerse themselves, and certainly I tell that to my daughters all the time who benefit from really living on campus. But I had the challenge of trying to work and pay my way through undergrad, so it's difficult with the labs and such. But I took a course that was called Physiological Psychology, and it was taught by Janice Till. And it was, I loved having a female hardcore scientist teaching me. And it was just a wonderful course about the brain. And I was intrigued from the beginning. And then there was a cluster of studies that she described about enriched environments. And this is what hooked me. This was my cocaine, I guess, of getting in the career. So it was a simple study of a team at Berkeley in the 60s who took young rats, and put them in kind of a Disneyland of sorts environment, where instead of being in a boring laboratory cage, which unfortunately that is what is done and so much in research today, they had little things, activity wheels and shelves to climb and little toys to explore, and they had each other to play with, and it was just a very enriching environment. And only after about 30 days, a month in that environment, they looked at their brains, and their brains had been resculptured. They were more complex in just 30 days. Their neurochemistry suggested that they were better learners. And it was just like magic to me, and that's weird for scientists to be so intrigued by that. But for my, 20-year-old brain at the time, it seemed like magic that you could change the brain, and that we're not, carved in stone from the beginning. And it began an interest that I'm still so passionate about, that we're accountable for our brains every day, and our brains change every minute of every day. And we better be smart about what environment and context we put our brains in. So after I took that course, and I was so excited about that, opened the door to thinking about research. I never heard about research. I didn't know you could do this kind of thing. And so I applied. I didn't have the mentor or really support. I couldn't do research as an undergraduate. And I asked. I wanted to so badly. I remember going to a biology professor, and they're very nice, and I did some field work with ichthyology and fish and such, but they just didn't have the facilities and they said, if you could find some cages and find some rats, you might put them here, but I didn't know enough to be able to do that, so that's why I've kind of compensated as a professor. If a student wants to do research, I certainly want to provide the resources for them to do it. But I ended up going to graduate school at the University of Georgia, not too far from home, still in the South, and the degree was biopsychology is what they called it. So it's a nice blend of biology and psychology. And so I continued to look at rodent models of motivation and such there. And so that's how I became a biopsychologist.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you. It's very encouraging for our students or anyone, young person, to hear that story. Well, so then you went to University of Georgia, and can you tell us, once you did your graduate work, how you happened to come to Randolph-Macon?
Yeah, so I was kind of following my interest and passion and not thinking so much about this degree will put me in this career and I'll make this amount of money and I'll be set. Even though I grew up in a blue collar family where that was a concern, being able to support yourself, I guess I always had confidence that if I continued to educate myself, I would be able to support myself. But so I got the degree, and several of my friends, peers at the time, were going and doing postdocs, and they were headed toward what we call RO1 research institutions, and they were going to be doing more research, and I loved research, and so that could be a possibility. I also, life intervenes, and I met my husband at graduate school there. He was in the industrial organizational psychology program, so he was in the IO program. I was in the bio program, so we were the IO-bio couple. We got married right after I got my degree in February of, and then we got married, I think, 3 weeks later or something. And so we were together, and so that was a factor. And he was at Fort Benning doing some consulting, working with a military contractor when he got his degree. And Auburn University was pretty close, so we could be together. I contacted them and just taught a year there so we could figure things out. And we decided that since it was harder for me to find a job being more specialized in biological psychology, Gary was really great about saying, well, let's both apply and then see what works best for both of us. And so I applied, but I wasn't as competitive as my peers because I didn't do that postdoc, that 3 or 4 years work to build up my resume. So I'll just say I was not the strongest. I didn't feel like I was a very strong candidate because of that. But I was very passionate about what we had done and the research that we were doing. And I got a late interview here. It's funny, I got 2 interviews, one at Hampton, Sydney,
funny.
and Randolph-Macon, and I wasn't really familiar with either of those.
Right.
And I ended up not interviewing at Hampton, Sydney because I had classes and they weren't very flexible with when I could come. And so I had a late interview like in April, and that's unheard of now.
Yeah.
Everybody's already selected who they're going to have, so maybe I was their desperate choice. I probably was in April, I'd have to be honest. But I came here, and things click, and you feel comfortable. And Carol Hughes picked me up at the airport, and she was always just so casual and supportive. And on the way to the hotel, we stopped by the grocery store. She needed to get bread. It was just
wow.
oh, hi, and very comfortable. And I gave my talk. I felt so welcomed, and everyone was so interested in what I was doing. I remember the dean at the time, Jerry Garris, who just was so interested, and the President Payne at the time. It was fun meeting with him because he went to Samford, not Stanford. It actually had a different name in Birmingham, Alabama. So we went to the same undergraduate institution. So it was fun to talk about that. And we had those connections. And the department was so interested in my research. And even though I didn't go into get this degree thinking, I'm going to be a professor, it was a very natural transition to think, this is where I can do research. And this is where I can provide that experience for the students that, even though I had a good experience in my undergraduate training, I could provide the research for them, that discovery, that Disneyland of sorts that changed the rat brains that got me so excited about this. I love a good lecture, but I know it's not the most stimulating time for the students when they're in the lab and when they're owning what they're doing and when they're making connections. That's an important part of the educational process too, in addition to the very important class work. So I felt that appreciation of my research along with my teaching. And I felt that they respected my enthusiasm for the discipline. And I remember telling Gary that this just feels right before he even, and I'm usually not very confident about things, and I said, if they offer this feels right. And I never, to me, growing up in Alabama, Virginia was like the great white north for me.
Right.
It was way north. It was far from home. And I remember, there's a funny story on the plane going back. Yeah. Well, coming, I remember the person sitting next to me said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to Randolph Macon to do an interview. Make them take you to the Smoky Pig. It's the best place on the planet to eat. So I remember, and I went to the Smoky Pig, and then on the plane back, I remember I stayed there was a bed and breakfast in town called the Wisteria. The gentleman who owned it, I believe his name was Glenn Crone, but I may be wrong about that. He played Santa Claus, he had a little Santa Claus corner or something in the house. It was a little bit different. He very much almost seemed to believe he was Santa Claus, so this was funny. And so I was just telling this, I don't know, I was making conversation on the plane back, and I said I stayed in this very unique place where the guy makes gifts all year long, and he's written a book about being Santa Claus, and he thinks he's Santa Claus. I remember the guy stood up, and his wife and kids were sitting like 10 rows behind, and the whole plane heard, honey, tell the kids that this woman slept with Santa Claus last night.
Oh my gosh.
Well, that's not really the way it was, but it's just fun stories from the beginning. And then got the offer, and Gary was looking at position actually in Dallas at the time, and where I would do the postdoc thing versus him coming here, and he felt like being in business, that Richmond was large enough that we could make it work, and he has really compromised for my career. We both have compromised to help each other, and which is very important when you're trying to do this dual career. So in 1989, so I'm in the 27th or 27 and a half years, I started here, and I was the wise old age of 25 when I started.
Wow.
So I wasn't too much older than the students. So that was an interesting experience. So.
Well, thank you. That's a wonderful story. Well, when you got here, you mentioned Carol Hughes. Tell us a little bit about what the department was like, the emphasis of the department, and were you able right away to get a lab going, up and running? And
Yes, Carol was interesting. She was hired as a biopsychologist or physiological psychologist years before. She, I believe, had her master's degree in that area. And then she retooled and wanted to become a counseling psychologist, and went back to school while she was teaching, and I think the college was very supportive of that. And then she did great meeting with clients and teaching and such. So it was small. Terry Winiger was the developmental psychologist, and I had a great friendship, and he kind of mentored me. He was later the chair after Carol, and then he went on to do administrative work. He left the college to do that. And I remember when I got here in August, and the next day that Carol had called and said, they want to meet, physical plant, they want to meet with you so that you can make sure that you have your lab ready to go. And I was so excited that they think this is important.
Yeah.
Now, I remember exactly that my startup was $6,000, and I had to be very smart about how I was going to use that. That's comparable to some of my students getting $500,000 or $1 million today. But it's good to be resourceful and have to figure out these things. So I was had just a little bit of money. We put some shelves into an old office downstairs in the Copley, the old Smithy basement. And then I had done my doctoral work looking at the role of running and kind of an addictive running in a model of rats. So I spent the bulk of my money buying activity wheels or running wheels for rats, the old stainless steel ones. And that was about it. I was looking at ulcers at the time. I didn't have all my fancy microscope stuff to even look at the brain. It just was not possible here. I did not have a lab to do that. So I was very happy to have a room, to have shelves, and to have those activity wheels and some cages that I could put some animals in.
Yeah.
And Carol was wonderful and introducing me to people like at VCU. She knew everybody everywhere. And I say it in the nicest way. She almost had a maternal influence on me. I was so young, and when I was pregnant, she gave baby showers, and she was just very. And when I lost my mom, just very supportive on all levels. So she introduced me to someone at VCU, Joe Porter. We immediately started collaborating. My husband, Gary, in trying to find something here, ended up the first year teaching at the University of Richmond. And there was a guy in the office next to him. His name was Craig Kinsley, and the chair at University of Richmond, Ken Blick, had a tradition of inviting the new faculty over for a hamburger barbecue at the beginning of the semester. So since Craig Kinsley was their wonderful new hire from Harvard University, and he was I call myself a behavioral neuroscientist, but he was what I was. And so it just so happened that since Gary, even though Gary was like a one-year position, they invited Gary and Craig and their spouses to come to dinner. And so at that point, I met Craig Kinsley, and boy, did we hit it off. They were fascinated with all of our kind of Gary Southern boy stories, and we clicked because we were in the same area, and as far as research and scholarship. So I didn't do a postdoc, but I had a mentor in the early days with Craig Kinsley, who had a wonderful lab over at the University of Richmond. So I hung out a lot there. I learned a lot from Craig, and after I learned a lot, we taught each other. And we shared students, and his students would come over to my lab, and my students would go to his lab. He started to get some instrumentation grants and was a mentor in writing grants. And so as soon as I could, I wrote a NSF instrumentation grant to get my first microscope and cryostat that helped, that cuts the tissue. And so I was so excited to have a real neuroscience lab. At this point, my office was in it was Copley 132, which is now a classroom. And I did a makeshift neuro lab, but people could walk by and see, we're harvesting brains here. So it wasn't a very normal lab, but, I was excited to have anything. And we started to do some good work. I remember I was so excited to get that grant. It was a matching grant, and so the college found the matching funds to help. And that's what I needed. I needed to get to the brain. That allowed me the instrumentation to study the brain, and I just love the brain. It's just amazing, and it's gorgeous, and it's exciting, and it's dynamic. So that allowed me to bring the students on board to share in that enthusiasm. So I had that support. I like that I started with wooden shelves and activity wheels, and then got the instrumentation. With the instrumentation grant, I was able to actually conduct research that allowed me to get some research grants. And it's important to stay active professionally to be able to get those grants in my area, because it's so expensive to do this work. It just cannot be supported by the institution. It's not fair for me to expect that. So I have to take that responsibility that I need to keep writing grants and to try to support the lab, so the students can have an opportunity to do the research and go and present their work. And boy, we have had a lot of wonderful support here at the college as well. But that allowed us to get at least some external funds for the work.
Well, that's great, and it's wonderful to hear how the collaboration between colleagues at other institutions, which I know we'll talk about more later. But that's that encouragement at the college and in the area, and to hear the development. That's wonderful. Well, so I think just to continue on with that, the neuroscience major was developed out of all of it as you were able to get more equipment and more labs. And can you talk about how you built on that to actually get a major here?
I had been chair. Well, I just stepped down as chair after 17 years. It's almost embarrassing to say. And I had always, everything we do is really about the students. And I started noticing several years ago that even our best students who were psychology majors, who had the neuroscience research and they wanted to go on and apply to neuroscience graduate programs, the fact that they didn't have a more traditional neuroscience curriculum under their belt was holding them back. So maybe they had to go and get a master's degree to take some of those more traditional courses in chemistry or cell or even neuroscience, more traditional neuroscience, in order to get to the programs that they wanted to get to. So I felt like even though I think our psych program was incredibly competitive, and within the psych program they were getting great research experience, but it wasn't viewed, it wasn't as ideal or optimal for them. So it made me start thinking about could we make develop something a little bit more formal with the neuroscience. And Macon and Joan Brock were always so supportive and being excited about that, and Pepper Lawn and Stuart Lawn through the years too have been just excited about neuroscience. They seem to be excited about neuroscience. So it was great to have their enthusiasm and support. And we started with trying to get a more general neuroscience major, and had some hiccups along the way. And I think it's difficult. You just don't say, "Oh, I've got an idea for a major." Everyone agree with me.
Yeah.
But, we all know that faculty are very good about critically analyzing everything. So there were some hiccups, and then it seemed like it would be the best thing to do to make it a behavioral neuroscience major that would still be housed in the psychology department until we could get everybody else maybe on board and coordinate, even though we do collaborate with biology and chemistry. With behavioral neuroscience, which was really more in my wheelhouse, but you don't want to have a major with one person. And so one day, Pepper Lawn took me to lunch, and he said, I'm hearing some stories about students being excited about what they're doing in class and lab, and what could you do next, or how could I help you or something? I said, oh, you may not want to ask that, because I think I literally have a wild idea. I kind of backtrack a little bit. I had been teaching comparative animal behavior since I got here, and had connected with this wonderful primate park in Miami. It's called Monkey Jungle, was the touristy part, but the Des Moines Conservancy was the more research aspect. I visited first when I was a graduate student in Miami, and it just took my breath away, because it was what I remembered mostly were these little long-tailed macaques called Java macaques, and they were in like an 5 to 7 acre compound, not in cages, engaging in spontaneous behavior. And their motto was, come to Monkey Jungle where the humans are caged, because you would walk through a caged walkway, and the monkeys run wild. And coming from all my concerns of needing to look at caged laboratory animals, because we need all the control to be science, it sure was, I wanted to expose students to what behavior looks like when it's spontaneous and complex and natural, and they had this beautiful habitat. And so early, maybe the next year that I got here, I said, we had this January term, and I called them. I said, can I bring students to Monkey Jungle? Sure. And they had a little research house, and they had a baby orangutan that was walking around. I mean, it was just, they had like 30 different species. And so it was just wonderful. And through the years I had maintained, we'd go there every once in a while. But no research institution had a formal affiliation with them, or no educational institution did. And so when Pepper asked me that question, little wheels started turning. And there are indeed little in my brain. Little rats started running on the little wheels. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to have like a satellite lab there, where we could not do anything invasive with those animals, but study their behavior and maybe collect some poop for hormones and such, and have the Randolph-Macon lab there. And so I ran this idea by Pepper, and he wanted to hear more. And I said, I'm not really a primatologist. I was trained somewhat at Yerkes, which was a primate lab shared by Emory and that the University of Georgia had access to. But I had, through my friend Craig Hensley at the University of Richmond, he had a postdoc years before, an Italian guy named Massimo Bardi, he was trained more in biological anthropology, but had done so much work with primates. And he just was a genius with the way he approached behavior statistically, and had such a respect for the complexity. And he knew the primates, so I knew if we had a lab or something there, we needed to have someone more formally involved with primates. I was just along for the ride because I just love it. But so that started opening a conversation about Mossy had. He was at Marshall University at the time, and we had continued to collaborate. He had done wonderful things with our students' research. And so we just started talking about, we had a behavioral neuroscience program, and we had kind of a satellite lab there, and we had primates, and I could do the rodents, and we had brains, and Mossy was great with the hormones. It seemed like something could really come together. I had no idea that if it could. There are a lot of ifs there. But they were excited of the demands. I'm friends, it's a brother and sister, Sharon and Frank. They were all on board with this, and so we got a trailer. I'm very proud of the trailer lab that we have there, and we started taking, and we were able to recruit Mossy here, and with him coming here, then we could start to, okay, let's make a major out of this. And we did it kind of within, and with the support of the psychology faculty, and many of them teach courses that that can be included in biology and chemistry as well. So we started to, we had our resources first, and then we pulled it all together, and I think it's a wonderful major, and we've got just a couple of years in, and a lot of interest. A lot of pre-med students are interested in this, so it's adding to the diversity of the psychology major, and I think it's just going to continue to grow and be a great educational experience for students.
Great. That's a fascinating story. I didn't even know all of those details. Well, so we're talking about the student research and doing this for the students and making a good experience. Would you like to talk a little bit about this SURF program? And, this year was the 20th anniversary. And just talk about how the development of that, because that's been a big part of your leadership.
Yeah. So a couple of years after I got here, I became friends with Sarah Schreiner, chair of the chemistry department, probably longer than I'd been chair of psychology. And we were going, there was some, I think I met him, they had meetings for teaching. It seems like it had a name like GATE or something, but we would get together and talk about teaching. And somehow we started to think about research and summer programs, and Sarah has a wonderful story when we make presentations about Jerry Garris being on board with that, and they had gone to a conference, and so we ended up writing a proposal for a program that we called Summer Undergraduate Research Fellowship, with the idea that maybe it could fund, I think in the beginning, about 3 students was what the administration said that they could fund, and we were very excited at the prospect of that. And we had a call for proposals and got the proposals, and I remember there were about 11 that were just really, really good. And, I've already told you the story about how my heart, I'm so passionate about students who want to do research. And here we were going to have to tell these students, no, you can't do it. We don't have enough money. And I said, I just can't do this. So Sarah and I remember we kind of barged into Liddell Payne's office and said, these students, that we can't tell these students no, you tell them no, or you find them some money. And so we ended up being able to fund some more. They were very accommodating, and we started with a few students, and then we've been able to build that program through the years. In the beginning, it really was more sciencey, and we've been able to branch out, include all disciplines, which is great. And it makes us, we're very mindful about what research is in other disciplines and needing to respect that and such. And then after that was established, Ben Shapiro really made a wonderful contribution so that we could do this in a bigger and better way. And I'm biased, but I think it's really a strong summer undergraduate research program. One thing that's a little bit different that we do is that we have that conference at the end. So the students really have to bring it all together. It's almost unheard of to do a research project in 9.5 weeks. It's very rushed, but they have that final, I did that sense of accomplishment. And many of them, rightfully so, will continue to research to add to that. But it really gives this, it's putting the bow on the package and gives them a sense of accomplishment. Sometimes research, you're not too sure where it ends, and it really never does end. But it gives, at that point in their educational early research careers, it's good to have a stopping point where we're recognizing and acknowledging you've done something really great here. And one of my favorite additions to that was, and when you become a parent, it changes the way you think about things too, but we started inviting parents, and I love seeing that sense of pride in the students and with the parents, and so it really is a nice event. There's not always exhausted, I don't know if we can do this again, but when you see how it transforms many of the students and allows faculty, we need to keep our hands in it, and they can explore new ideas, so it's a great enriching environment experience, I think, for both the faculty and the students.
And I always love hearing the variety of proposals and when they go around and talk about them. That's great. So you have written through your career many publications, many articles and books, but I just want to name a couple of them for the record, and you can talk about others. But with Professor Craig Kinsley, you mentioned, you've had a couple editions anyway of Clinical Neuroscience, the Neurobiology of Mental Health, a couple of editions, and your research led to a book recently, Lifting Depression, a neuroscientist's hands-on approach to activating your brain's healing power, which came out of your own research. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you balance your own research and writing when you're prolific with the demands of department chair and a heavy teaching schedule at Randolph-Macon.
I probably don't do it well, Lynda.
Well, it looks like you're very successful at it.
But I kind of have a bug for writing, and not only writing, but I love being able to tell science stories where everyone can understand it, and I think that's part of growing up in a family where no one went to college, and where science seemed to be something out there for other people. No, this is nature, and it's for all of us to enjoy and to inform us. So part of my writing for the mainstream, the Lifting Depression, about really what I've learned by watching and listening to the rats, and how certain behaviors have been conserved through time. When I say conserved, they have a brain that does all the same things, eating, and they have social relationships and such. I don't know if they have politics and religion and stuff, but that's uniquely human. But we've learned a lot through that research, and I have a bit of a, like to look at evolutionary roots of our behaviors and such. So after writing, you mentioned clinical neuroscience. Well, Craig Kinsley and I had both taught courses at our respective institutions about mental illness, and we'd had students come and say, there's not a real course where when you teach us a course about the brain, there's a chapter at the end about mental illness, but it's kind of stuck we don't spend a lot of time with that. And then in the psychology department, there's a psychopathology course where you spend the whole course talking about mental illness, but the brain's not so much a part of that. What about a course where and the whole course looks at the brain, behavior, kind of neurobiology and mental illness? Well, that's great. Well, I taught an honors course called The Broken Brain. There was a mainstream book out about that, and Craig had taught something at University of Richmond. And I thought, this is really what we need to be. We need a course for this. This is kind of important. There wasn't a textbook out there. So that was my first mistake, realizing that. And then I got this, the bug about, what would go into a textbook, and how do you propose a textbook? And so I did some research and wrote a sample chapter, and I started with Worth Publishers. They were excited about it. And so I went through this process, asked Craig to join me, so we co-authored that. Boy, was that a learning experience. It was incredibly hard. I didn't know what this field was. I kind of, had to really work hard to develop that. So I learned a lot. I also learned that you may not want to write a textbook for a course that doesn't exist.
Right.
So obviously I'm not a good entrepreneur, but I was passionate. I learned a lot. When I was writing the depression chapter, it was depressing because there just wasn't literature to support that the antidepressant drugs or all this were too much much more effective than placebo effect, and it just seemed like something wasn't right. But I dutifully reported what was in the literature, and then I knew that when I finish the book, I had to go back to the drawing board, and I didn't know if I could contribute anything, but I needed to be able to have some time to think about this thing called depression. I had recently lost my mom. She was about my age. I just turned 53, and it's hard to imagine that I lost her that early. But of course, you have a transient depression when you lose someone. So I had the real world, exposure and going from the literature, and so I just kind of approached that and wrote Lifting Depression and came up with some other ideas about really bringing in the role of physical effort and how important physical activity is to our world and our lives. And we can all imagine a contemporary society that has been altered compared to not even my grandparents. Their lives were so different. So we had models of laboratory model or rodent research where they had to engage in physical activity to get their life's rewards, which were Fruit Loops. If life was just so simple. But so I built on some of the rodent research and epidemiological and evolutionary and personal, and wrote Lifting Depression. And I've also written the Lambert Chronicles about all the stories and I was able to name and the students have done. I am just finishing the artwork on, no, I didn't do the art, but finishing a textbook. They're approving the art with Oxford University Press for a textbook for that first course that lured me into the discipline, biological psychology. And I'm the sole author on that. So I don't know, 6 years, you lose count. 6 years, at least 6 years I've been working on that. And again, what I want to do is hook students with these stories and then add all of the sodium potassium channels and all the other neuroscience information. So that's been huge, and it probably has been too much and exhausted me, and my daughters will probably say, Mom, don't ever do that again. But it's a love-hate, really. I love having written, and I learned so much, but it's hard to sit down for hours and hours and make that happen. And I just turned in a manuscript to Yale University Press entitled Bursting Brain Bubbles, about how our brains can value things inaccurately, and that can lead to some mental illness, much like the housing bubble, where you start to value things inappropriately, then you invest in the wrong things. And so so that should come out next fall, I think. And it's been interesting watching the political campaign because I can see people in bubbles and how that's affecting. Right. And I'm trying to say, no, don't write about that. Don't write about that. I don't want to popularize it too much, but I might have to write a side article about that. But that's been fun too, looking at what does the brain really do. It processes what I call contingency. It calculates contingencies about what the best behavior in different contexts is. So we need the real world, an authentic experience to be able to churn that out. Just like our lungs need real air and our hearts need real blood, our brains need real experiences. And so that's what that book is about. So I didn't realize that they would come together at the same time. Right. So that was very difficult. So it's difficult, but I love I cannot be a professor without research. It just fuels me, and it's a way to bring the students in, and I just love seeing how invested and excited they are. So that's a necessary balance, I think, regardless of where we are. And it's hard doing this with a heavy teaching load. It's a challenge. So we just need to acknowledge that. It is a challenge, and any way we can support our young faculty and let them know that we appreciate that. And Randolph-Macon with the internal grants, I took advantage of those that have been so wonderful, the Craigie grant and the Chenery grant, and having the administration support. We recognize that this is important, and maybe you can have a little time to do this or work on your sabbatical on this. So that we continue to build those faculty up. Because it's not fun sometimes getting rejections on grant it's never fun getting rejections on that. And you just need to know, I've got to get that rejection to learn. That's my authentic brain experience, so I can calculate these contingencies to do better. So writing is just a self-infliction that I've added on top of everything. But I think it comes from my past of where education was not part. Nature educated me with animals and such. But I love sharing the laboratory stories the brain stories with just anybody and everybody who will listen. And I find that most people are really intrigued with
Right.
rats and brains and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So I love telling those stories with the writing.
Well, that's wonderful. You can really hear your passion for that. And I think when you are describing the writing, I know it's incredibly hard work, but I think you're experiencing what you said your students experience in the Surf Project. It's that culminating project, and it's tying that bow on
Yeah,
it.
it is. That's
So,
a good way to put it, Lynda.
yeah, so that's great. You're
It's just another
modeling.
level of-
You're modeling that for your students. Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, thank you for mentioning those new books too. That's very exciting. I also want to mention for the record, your teaching, your passion, which we can hear, but you've won many awards, and there's a long list of awards, but I just want to highlight just a few, and you can talk about others if you like. You won the Virginia State Council of Higher Education Outstanding Faculty Award in 2001, the Samuel Nelson Gray Distinguished Professor Award here at Randolph-Macon in 2007. In 2008, you were the Virginia Professor of the Year, which is awarded by the Council for the Advancement and Support of Education and the Carnegie Foundation. And in 2013, the Virginia Foundation of Independent Colleges Excellence in Teaching Award. Many others, but those are just state awards and also prestigious college awards that I want to just congratulate you on.
Thanks for
and glad that
mentioning.
you're recognized for your good work. Well, we are sad to note that you're going to be leaving Randolph-Macon at the end of this semester, but you're ready for a new exciting chapter in your career in teaching and research. So would you like to tell us about what you'll be doing next?
Yeah, I always thought I would not only retire, but probably die in my office here at Randolph-Macon College, and they just have to cart me off. That was just the way I saw my life. But life presents different twists and turns, and if we're living this authentic, or trying to live this experience, we keep our eyes open to what's happening around us. And Craig Kinsley, who I mentioned at the University of Richmond, who was not only a valued colleague, but a very dear friend. My girls called him Uncle Craig. Well, he passed away in January due to heart failure, and it was tragic. And he was a legend at the University of Richmond. He had motivated so many students about the brain. His passion, he was just this childlike curiosity and his passion, and he built, he just had such a history of dedicated students, and it was very difficult for the department at the University of Richmond. And so, I certainly was happy to help them in their search, because it was important to me and his students that they get the right person there. Anything I could do to help. And it just kind of shifted into, they asked me to consider that. Mm-hmm. And reflexively, because RMC is in my DNA, mm-hmm. I said, absolutely not. I'm at Randolph-Macon. I'm not there. And but then I tried to remember, I've always told my students to be mindful of new opportunities. I'll never say that I've been comfortable and this has been I've always had challenges at Randolph-Macon, good challenges. It hasn't become boring or not exciting. It always has been exciting and challenging here. But I had been, I mentioned that I came here when I was 25 years old. Mm-hmm. I've been here for all of my career, and mm-hmm. I truly have grown up, and I've learned, and I attribute everything, if I'm a good or bad professor, it's Randolph-Macon's that mm-hmm. has helped mold me. But we usually benefit from, the brain benefits from novelty and new experiences. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned that I've been chair here for 17 years, and I began to think that other people might flourish and the department could grow in new and interesting ways that maybe I wasn't there. I had been there for a long time. I felt so good about the department, the psychology department being so strong with all the mm-hmm. faculty that we currently have, and I was excited about behavioral neuroscience because I knew that with Mossy and the established program that could move on. It already has the foundation, and I reluctantly, I said, I want to interview, I'll give a talk, I'll talk to people. And so it morphed into me realizing that it's important, if I'm going to tell the students to take on new and exciting challenges, we never know if it's the right thing to do. I'm trying to calculate contingencies. So I just decided to take that on. It'll be different. The good news is I will be close by. I will still collaborate with Mossy and hopefully the person they hire, and we'll have joint programs, and hopefully continue to be involved with the Monkey Jungle and expand the base, the Richmond Ashland base. Sometimes we're not defined by institutions, we're defined by our passion for the material, and I'm starting to see that, and so challenge myself. So I don't know if this old brain's up for all the challenges, but it is very sad for me to, I'm kind of in transition, letting go, and it's an emotional experience this semester, because I've always been a part of everything that's going on, but I feel confident that Kristen Claren is now the chair, and Mossy with the behavioral neuroscience, and the wonderful faculty here. It's probably going to be better after I leave. I just hope that it is, that we've set this foundation and it will continue to grow, and I will be very proud if I can watch good things happen at Randolph-Macon, and hope that I was part of that in some way. So I will always be a member of this family, and I have benefited from this, and I will share that story to anyone who wants to listen.
That's great. No, that's great. Well, just and all the best. And what you said about the brain, I mean, you can just see the wheels and the new connections and new places, and that's awesome. I think it's an inspiration to everyone, and you're living out. I think, again, you're modeling for your students what you've been teaching, and I think
it's been a privilege to work with these students, and so many of the students I've become a student of theirs, so they've gone on and done great things, and they've been kind enough to collaborate with me and teach me things, and it's like being a parent. You want your kids to go off and do these great things, and I've seen my students do that.
Right. Well, we look forward to all of those connections to continue. I'm sure the department will be very excited to have that even stronger connection with the University of Richmond, and you'll continue that and see the program grow. Well, thank you so much. I want to just give you a chance to share any other experiences, or if there's anything that we haven't touched on that's been important that you really wanted to talk about today, or any.
Probably I've already talked too much.
No, it's been fascinating.
Now, just to reiterate that it's a privilege when you're able to go through life and do what you love. And I see a lot of people who are struggling with jobs that they're not happy with. And I'm about to go talk to or show a video to our success strategies class about, they've been talking about careers all semester, but introduce the idea about success isn't only about a career, it's about being happy in life, and not only about how much money you make, but how meaningful the things you do, how that is. And then we'll talk about the science of happiness and psychology, but I am truly fueled by the discipline that I have landed in. I never knew what neuroscience was when I was growing up. I don't know how I got here, but by following my passion, and the brain and little critters and animals, animal behaviors always amazed me. That has become my profession, and it's so wonderful to be able to share the passion of that in the capacity of being a professor and a researcher and writing books for. It's so wonderful when someone emails me who hasn't been to college, but they say they've learned something from a book I've written. That just means so much. So I just encourage all the students who are here at Randolph-Macon and everywhere we have to be practical and try to have a job that will pay the bills, but to know that we'll truly be successful if we follow that passion and think about how meaningful our career is going to be down the road, and that we continue to be students of our discipline and to learn and never think we figured it out. So I'm obviously starting on a new journey to be a new student and to learn. So as long as we're living, we've got to be learning and experiencing these new contexts and new situations. So it's nice that the career and life, my family, that all has worked together. It's a lot of hard work, but it sure is rewarding. And so I feel very fortunate to have had that life experience thus far.
Well, thank you so much. Kelly Lambert, thank you for being with us and sharing all your stories with Making Memories.
You're welcome.